Get out of that seat now. You're making the other passengers uncomfortable." The words rang out loud and clear, echoing off the polished cabin walls of Horizon Air Flight 319. The voice belonged to Sarah Mitchell, the lead flight attendant. Crisp uniform, perfect posture, and a tone that left no room for negotiation. Her eyes were fixed on a single passenger, an 11-year-old black boy sitting quietly in seat 2A. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't loud, messy, or even confused. He was simply sitting, back straight, hands folded in his lap, looking out the window as other passengers boarded. But to Sarah, that was reason enough. Before we dive into this powerful story, where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Stories like this deserve to be heard. Now back to the story. The boy's name was Jaden Carter, 11 years old, button-down shirt, navy sweater, dark gray slacks, and polished black shoes. Not a wrinkle on him. His backpack, leather, monogrammed, was neatly tucked beneath his seat. Jaden had flown dozens of times before, but this was his first time flying alone. He held a first-class ticket purchased by his father, Michael Carter, the CEO and founder of Carter Dynamics, a major consulting partner for Horizon Air. But Jaden never mentioned that. He didn't need to. All he had to say, calmly, was, "This seat is mine. I'm not asking, I'm stating a fact." Sarah blinked, startled for a moment by the boy's composure. "Sweetie," she said in a voice laced with fake concern, "this is first class. You must be confused." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She stood there, blocking the aisle, with an air of authority that said, "I'm right, and you just don't know it yet." Jaden didn't flinch. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the boarding pass. He held it up, steady and clear. "Horizon Air, Flight 319, Seat 2A. Would you like to scan it again?" Sarah didn't take the ticket. Instead, she crossed her arms. "Policy requires all minors to be seated in the front row if unaccompanied," she said, glancing at the seat as if Jaden had somehow smuggled himself there. "We'll get you a seat back in economy. Just follow me." Jaden's voice stayed even. "That's not what the check-in staff told us. My father called ahead and confirmed everything with Horizon's VIP desk. I'm allowed to sit here." Sarah's expression hardened. "Sir, I'm not going to argue with a child. Please gather your things." A few passengers nearby started watching. A middle-aged Asian woman in 2C, Mrs. Emily Nguyen, leaned over slightly and whispered, "Why are you removing him? He's not doing anything wrong." Sarah ignored her. Jaden remained seated. Then came the call. Sarah tapped her earpiece. "We need a gate agent to first class. I have a child in the wrong seat, possibly wrong section altogether." Minutes later, a young ground staffer walked up the jet bridge. Her name tag read Aisha Williams, and she looked no older than 25. She paused when she saw Jaden and instantly recognized him. Her eyes widened just slightly, but her face stayed composed. "Let me scan the boarding pass, ma'am," she said. Jaden handed it to her without a word. She scanned it, confirmed. "Seat 2A, Horizon Air Priority." Aisha nodded. "He's in the correct seat." Sarah's lips tightened. Still, unaccompanied minors don't usually sit in first. Aisha cut her off gently. "His record has a special clearance note from Executive Operations. It's already been approved." Mrs. Nguyen spoke again, louder this time. "So why was he being moved?" Silence. Just then, A tall man in a business suit entered from the main boarding door, Robert Hayes, the first officer. "What's going on here?" he asked. Glancing from Jaden to Sarah, she gave him a quick rundown, framing the issue as a misunderstanding. Robert looked down at Jaden, then at Aisha. Then coldly, he said, "Let's just move him to coach. We don't want disruptions before takeoff." Aisha looked stunned. "Sir, he's cleared." Robert raised a hand. "We'll deal with it later. For now, just get him up." Jaden didn't cry. He didn't shout. He stood up slowly, picked up his backpack, and looked at the seat one last time. Then he turned to Sarah and said softly, "I hope you realize what you just did." And with that, he walked out of first class, escorted, not by kindness, but by policy, twisted by prejudice. They sat him near the rear of the plane, next to the emergency exit, a spot normally reserved for adults. He didn't argue. He just sat down. Back straight again, eyes on the seatbelt sign above. A man across the aisle stared at him. A younger couple whispered, but Jaden didn't look at them. He pulled out his phone, opened it, pressed one contact. It rang once, then twice. Then he spoke. "Dad, it's happening again." The hum of the aircraft was faint as Jaden sat alone, tucked into a corner seat near the emergency exit. Far from the luxury of seat 2A, far from the comfort his father had carefully arranged for him. The air around him felt heavier than before, like dignity had been drained from the cabin one drop at a time. But the boy didn't slouch. He didn't pout. He sat tall, back straight, hands folded neatly in his lap, just as he was taught. Across the aisle, passengers exchanged confused glances, unsure whether they had just witnessed a mistake or something much more deliberate. Aisha Williams, the young black ground staffer who had scanned Jaden's boarding pass minutes earlier, lingered near the front galley, glancing back toward where Jaden had been placed. Her brow furrowed as she tapped her tablet. Everything in the system checked out. Jaden Carter, first class, cleared, executive override on file. There was no reason for him to be moved, none that made sense on paper. She could feel it, that slow, sick pull in her gut. The kind you only get when something's not just wrong, it's unjust. She stepped back into the jet bridge and pulled out her phone. Her voice was low but firm. "Yeah, hi, this is Aisha at Gate 19. I think you need to alert VIP services. Michael Carter's son just got pulled from first." Then she hung up. No panic, no drama, just truth, relayed quietly, the same way Jaden had carried himself. Back inside the plane, Sarah stood in the aisle, smiling tightly as if nothing had happened. She bent to adjust a seatbelt in row 3, carefully ignoring the murmur of unease rising behind her. "He'll be fine," she said to no one in particular. Children are resilient, but not everyone shared her view. In seat 2C, Mrs. Emily Nguyen, the Asian passenger who had spoken up earlier, sat with arms folded, her eyes narrowed in disbelief. "That boy had a ticket," she whispered to the man beside her. "A first-class ticket." "I saw it. I don't care what they say. That wasn't policy. That was something else." Meanwhile, near the rear of the plane, Jaden sat unmoving, but his thoughts weren't. They spun in quiet rhythm, sharp, steady, and all too familiar. This wasn't the first time. A year earlier, on a different airline, flying with his mother, a similar thing had happened. A suspicious glance, a whispered comment, a reassignment for safety. Back then, he had cried when they landed, but not this time. Now he was 11, and he understood exactly what had happened. "My dad said never raise my voice," he muttered softly to himself, staring at the call button above his seat. Raise the truth, at the front of the plane. First Officer Robert Hayes was still standing near the cockpit, arms folded. His body language screamed disinterest. When Aisha returned briefly to speak with him, her tone professional, he didn't even look up from the manifest. "We've got clearance to close the cabin," he said. "Let's move this thing along." "Sir?" Aisha replied carefully. "Michael Carter is on the Horizon Air VIP list. He's also the external consultant for operations." If his son was reassigned inappropriately, Robert cut her off with a wave. "Look, he's a kid. He'll get another seat. We're not delaying this flight over a seat assignment." Aisha didn't argue, but she didn't leave either. She stood still for a moment, letting her silence do the talking. Then she turned and walked away, straight toward the front desk. Meanwhile, Jaden's phone buzzed quietly in his palm. "One new message. On my way, don't move." Just 5 words, but they carried the weight of calm thunder. Jaden didn't smile, but his eyes, for the first time since he sat down, blinked a little slower. In the first-class cabin, William Baxter, a well-dressed white man in his 60s, looked up from his newspaper. He'd been quiet this whole time, watching, absorbing. His father had taught him how to do that. And in his years of flying, he'd seen all kinds of travelers in first class. But this was the first time he'd seen a child so neatly dressed and composed be removed without cause. He didn't say anything yet, but something inside him shifted. A memory of being on the wrong side of silence too many times. Bias, he thought to himself, isn't always loud. Near the jet bridge entrance, a commotion began to stir. The glass doors parted, and in stepped a tall man in a charcoal gray suit. No tie, just crisp lines and an ID badge clipped to his blazer. Michael Carter, CEO of Carter Dynamics. But here, he wasn't just the head of a billion-dollar company. He was a father, and his son had called. Aisha spotted him first and moved quickly. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "your son's boarding pass was valid. We scanned it. He was in 2A. I don't know why they moved him." Michael nodded once. "You did your job, thank you." His voice was calm, controlled. But there was no mistaking the steel underneath. Without waiting for permission, he walked past the check-in counter and onto the jet bridge. 2 executives from Horizon's Client Relations Department followed, trying to catch up. "Sir, we're handling the situation." "You weren't there," Michael said. "Now you will be, back inside the cabin." Jaden glanced up from his seat and saw the familiar figure appear at the front door. His posture didn't change, but something in his chest settled. His father had arrived, not with shouting, not with lawyers, just presence. And with that, the story was no longer just about one boy and one seat. It was about something far greater, something that was about to shift the balance of silence and accountability in the air. The engines of Horizon Air Flight 319 hadn't even powered up, but something deeper had already taken off, a shift in energy. Quiet but powerful, that pulsed through the cabin like a low-pressure system before a storm. Jaden sat alone in the rear section, tucked by the emergency exit, far from the wide leather seats, warm towels, and sparkling drinks of first class. He didn't fidget. He didn't lean against the window. He just sat there, straight-backed, still, quiet. From the outside, you might have mistaken him for calm, but inside, it wasn't peace. It was processing, the kind of silence that grows when dignity is dented. But pride won't let it break. His phone sat face down on his lap, Michael's last message still glowing through the glass. "On my way, don't move." Jaden hadn't replied. He didn't need to. He knew his father understood the weight of silence, the kind that speaks louder than anything shouted across a terminal. The cabin crew moved past him like he didn't exist. Sarah stood at the front galley, chatting with another attendant, and chuckling softly about a passenger who had asked for sparkling water with lime instead of lemon, as if nothing had happened. As if the displacement of a child, a paying first-class passenger, was a footnote, not a fault. One row back, a toddler cried over a dropped toy. Someone rang the call button for another blanket. Life moved forward, but Jaden remained anchored in that quiet corner. Not as a child pouting, but as a person remembering. And memory for Jaden wasn't a distant fog. It was vivid. Last year, Seattle to Orlando, he was with his mom, Dr. Rachel Carter, a pediatrician, flying to visit his aunt. They were dressed nicely, both of them, matching carry-ons, reserved seats. She had booked them in Comfort Plus, but the gate agent surprised them with an upgrade. 2 seats in first class, no extra charge. A thank you, he had said, for flying often. They were thrilled, but 30 minutes into boarding, a different flight attendant approached, looked at his mother and asked, "Are you sure these are your seats?" That was the exact phrasing. "Are you sure?" Like she couldn't possibly be right. Rachel had shown the passes, smiled politely, but the woman pressed, suggested they had made a mistake. Another attendant joined her. It took 5 minutes, 2 scans, and 1 apology before they were allowed to remain seated. But something in his mom dimmed that day. And after they landed, she told him quietly, in the back of the taxi, "Next time, we book under your father's account." And Jaden remembered thinking, why should that matter? He never got an answer. But now, sitting alone in the rear cabin, he felt the sting return. Not the exact wound, but the scar being poked at again. Jaden looked down at his shoes, still shined, still tied tight. He hadn't moved, he hadn't cried, he hadn't even breathed heavily, but he was aware of the way people looked. The way the man across the aisle had watched him walk past, curious but unbothered. The way a teenage boy behind him had smirked. And most of all, the way Sarah's voice had sharpened the second she saw him in 2A. She hadn't asked for ID, she hadn't scanned anything herself. She just decided, and decided loudly, and no one had stopped her, until now, because down the jet bridge, steps were coming. 15 minutes had passed since that call, 15 minutes of quiet, 15 minutes of holding himself together, not because he was told to, but because he chose to. And then, a presence shifted the gate. Passengers turned subtly, a few leaned into the aisle. Emily Nguyen, still seated in 2C, clutched her scarf a little tighter. William Baxter looked up from his tablet. At first it was just a tall silhouette, a man in a dark, perfectly tailored suit, but not flashy, no watch, no tie, just a crisp white shirt open at the collar and a Horizon Air executive badge clipped to his lapel. Michael Carter, CEO of Carter Dynamics, and the very man Horizon Air had hired to consult on their new passenger inclusion protocols. Irony, as it turned out, had just walked through their own front door. Michael didn't stride, he didn't storm. He walked with purpose, with stillness, the kind that makes people sit straighter without knowing why. Sarah caught a glimpse of him as he stepped into the first-class cabin. Her voice caught in her throat. "Sir, you can't—" He simply raised a hand, then reached into his inside pocket, calmly removed a laminated ID card, and held it out. "Michael Carter, Horizon Air Partner, Executive Operations Access. I need to see the crew. Now." There was no yelling, no tension in his face, but something about the stillness in his eyes said everything. Sarah's jaw tightened. We didn't know he was—" Michael cut her off with a slow blink. "You didn't know who his father was, but you knew what he looked like, and that was enough for you." Captain Thompson, the pilot, stepped out of the cockpit. He was a composed man in his early 50s, experienced and rarely shaken. "Mr. Carter," he said cautiously, "I wasn't informed." "I'm not here for apologies," Michael replied, his tone never rising. "I'm here for my son, and for the truth." That was when Jaden rose from his seat in the back. He didn't rush. He didn't make a scene. He simply picked up his backpack, walked the aisle in perfect silence, and stopped in front of his father. The two stood there for a moment, eye to eye, no words needed. Then Jaden asked, clear as ever, "Are we fixing this?" Michael didn't answer right away. He turned to the flight crew, to the executives who had followed him on board, and then back to Sarah and Robert, whose silence now felt less professional and more exposed. Finally, Michael looked down at his son and said, calmly but firmly, "We're not just fixing it, we're resetting the standard." And with those words, the cabin wasn't just a cabin anymore. It became a courtroom, and justice was about to be served, quietly, thoroughly, and in full view of everyone who thought they could get away with mistaking skin tone for status. You could feel the tension shift the moment Michael Carter stepped fully into the cabin, not with noise, not with drama, but with that heavy, undeniable presence that only certain people carry. It wasn't just the suit or the executive badge clipped neatly to his lapel. It was how he moved, deliberate, composed, like a man who had no need to raise his voice to be heard. The few passengers who recognized him sat up straighter. Others just sensed something different, like the air had changed. Sarah Mitchell, who had just moments ago dismissed an 11-year-old boy from seat 2A, now stood near the galley, her smile flickering as if unsure whether to brace for defense or deflect with charm. "Sir, we weren't aware that Jaden was—" she began, her voice softer now, almost pleasant, but Michael didn't even glance at her. He turned instead to his son, who had just walked up the aisle from his temporary seat near the emergency exit. The two stood silently, father and son, just a few feet apart. Jaden didn't cry, didn't complain. He looked up at his father with eyes that carried both pride and a quiet question. "Did I do okay? Did I handle this right?" Michael gave a slight nod, then placed a hand on Jaden's shoulder. "You did what I taught you," he said calmly. "Now let's finish this the right way." Then he turned. "Captain Thompson," he said, eyes now shifting to the pilot, who had just stepped out of the cockpit with the hesitation of a man not fully briefed, but fully aware that something had gone wrong. "I'm requesting a temporary hold on departure. This flight will not push back until we've addressed a very serious incident involving a first-class seat reassignment and potential discrimination." Captain Thompson, a veteran with salt and pepper hair and the demeanor of someone used to controlling chaos, held his hands up slightly. "Mr. Carter, I wasn't made aware of any issue until just now. If you'll allow me a moment." Michael raised a brow. "Your crew removed a child from a confirmed first-class seat. Not just any child, mine, and not just any seat. A paid, confirmed, pre-cleared seat, arranged through your own VIP operations department. You didn't need to know he was my son, but someone should have stopped it the second it was questioned. Instead, it was escalated, publicly and without cause. Robert Hayes, the first officer, who had been leaning against the cockpit doorframe, stepped forward now. "Sir, if I may—" "You may not," Michael interrupted, still composed but firm. "You were the one who told the gate agent, and I quote, 'Just move the kid. I have it on video.'" Robert's mouth opened slightly, as if to form an excuse, but no words came. Sarah stepped in again, trying to soften the moment. "Mr. Carter, we followed standard protocol. When a child is traveling alone—" Don't, Michael said quietly. Don't hide behind policy. This wasn't about procedure. This was about perception. You saw a black child in first class and assumed he didn't belong. That wasn't a policy failure. That was a personal judgment call, and it was wrong. Silence followed. Then, from behind Michael, came a voice. I saw it too, said Emmeline Gwynn. Standing now in her seat at 2C, she looked around the cabin as if finally deciding enough was enough. That boy showed his ticket, clearly, politely. She didn't even look at it, just called for backup, and none of us stopped it. We watched it happen. Sarah's face flushed, but she said nothing. Then, surprisingly, another voice joined in. William Baxter, the older white gentleman in seat 1A who had been silent up to now. He set down his tablet, stood up slowly, and spoke with the calm tone of someone who had lived through decades of hindsight. I judged him too, he admitted, eyes now on Jaden. I looked up and saw a boy sitting alone in first class and thought, maybe he's in the wrong place. I didn't say it, but I thought it. And I was wrong. This isn't just about policy. This is about how we see people. Michael nodded slightly, acknowledging the honesty. Then he turned back to the crew. You have two choices, he said clearly. You can continue with this flight after issuing a formal apology to my son and reinstating him to his rightful seat. Or you can explain to your superiors and to the public why Horizon Air allowed implicit bias to override confirmed boarding rights. Robert's face was pale now. Sarah looked down at the floor. Neither moved. Michael turned to Aisha Williams, who had quietly re-entered the cabin at the rear. Aisha, he said, can you please escort Jaden back to 2A? She smiled, just a little, and walked up the aisle. Of course, Mr. Carter. Jaden didn't wait for help. He stepped forward on his own, looked Sarah in the eyes, not with anger, but with that same quiet strength his father carried, and walked back to seat 2A like he'd never left it. A few passengers clapped, not many, but enough to make a point. As Jaden sat down, Michael turned to the crew one last time. Bias doesn't always shout, he said. Sometimes it whispers behind a smile. Sometimes it hides inside a policy. But my son heard it, and so did I. Then he took a deep breath, looked at Captain Thompson, and said with finality, This plane doesn't fly until the wrong people step off it. For a few moments, the cabin of Horizon Air Flight 319 felt like a courtroom suspended in air, even though the plane hadn't moved an inch from the gate. Outside, the tarmac shimmered under the August heat. But inside, it was something colder, tense, still. Every passenger now knew they had witnessed something larger than a seating error. This was a reckoning. Michael Carter stood at the front of first class, not as a CEO flashing credentials, but as a father whose quiet resolve had shifted the room. His son, Jaden, now seated again in 2A, didn't need protection. He needed truth, and his father was delivering it, word by measured word. Captain Thompson cleared his throat, stepping forward. Mr. Carter, I understand your concern, but may I suggest we de-escalate this with a formal report filed after takeoff? Michael turned to him, calm, sharp. No, we don't take off with this crew still responsible for that action. You want me to file paperwork later while Sarah pours champagne up here and pretends nothing happened? I don't think so. Robert Hayes, the first officer, stepped up, his voice low but defensive. It's not personal. We didn't mean any harm. Michael looked straight at him. That's the problem. You made it personal the second you saw his skin. And don't you dare confuse intent with impact. This isn't about whether you meant harm. It's about the harm you caused. Robert exhaled slowly, his composure cracking. I followed the lead flight attendant's judgment. She said it was a policy issue. No, Michael said. She said it was a policy issue, and you believed her without ever checking. That's not protocol. That's complicity. The silence that followed was broken not by an airline staffer, but by a passenger. Emily Nguyen, seated firmly in 2C, stood up again, her voice clear. Proud, he's right, I saw everything. I saw. That boy was calm, respectful, prepared. He even asked her to rescan his boarding pass. Sarah never even looked. She just dismissed him. Her voice caught briefly, but she pushed through. And you all let her. I didn't speak loud enough when it mattered, but I'm speaking now. Michael nodded to her gently. Thank you. Then to the crew, he added. She didn't know who Jaden was. And that's the point. No child should have to carry a title, a last name, or a badge to be treated with basic human respect at that moment. William Baxter, the older white gentleman in 1A, stood up again, this time with more certainty in his voice. You know, he said, I've flown Horizon for over 20 years, seen the good, the bad. I've had champagne in this exact seat on Christmas morning. But I've also seen how fast people like that young man over there get judged, not by their behavior, but by their presence. He paused, turning toward Sarah and Robert. Today, I watched a child be stripped of dignity in front of a cabin full of adults who said nothing, and I said nothing. That's on me. He looked to Michael. I judged him too, and I was wrong. Thank you for reminding us. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her arms crossed. Look, I didn't mean to insult anyone. I've been in this job for 18 years. I trust my instincts. Michael's eyes narrowed. Instinct isn't an excuse for injustice. Experience should make you more cautious, not more careless. Robert stepped back, visibly shaken. Captain Thompson exhaled slowly. What are you asking us to do, sir? Michael didn't hesitate. I'm asking Horizon Air to remove Sarah Mitchell and Robert Hayes from this flight, effective immediately. They're not fit to fly, not with my son, not with any passenger who's been watching this unfold. He turned to the passengers. Is there anyone here who objects to this request? No one raised a hand. In fact, a few people nodded. The atmosphere had changed completely. No longer awkward silence. This was support. Quiet, but real. Aisha Williams stepped forward from the galley. We have 2 standby crew members at Gate 17. They can be on board in 10 minutes. Captain Thompson paused, then gave a slow nod. Understood. I'll make the call. Sarah's face dropped. You're taking me off the flight? For what, a misunderstanding? Michael turned to her one last time. No, not a misunderstanding, a misjudgment, and one my son will remember for the rest of his life. He deserved better, and now so will every passenger after him. As Sarah and Robert gathered their belongings and were escorted off the plane by another supervisor, there was no applause, no public shaming, just silence. The kind that falls when truth lands so hard it doesn't need to echo. Jaden sat quietly, watching them go. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply whispered to himself. I'm not angry, but I remember everything. Michael walked over to his son, knelt slightly beside him, and asked, Do you want me to stay on board? Jaden looked up and said, I'll be fine. Dad, go do what you need to do. Michael smiled. You already did what I raised you to do. Then he turned to the Horizon Air executives who had now entered the cabin after witnessing everything from the gate. This isn't just about my son, Michael told them. It's about every passenger you ever judged wrong. It's about trust, about silence, about whether Horizon Air wants to just operate planes or set a standard for the skies. They nodded, slowly, wordlessly. One of them made a note in his phone. Another whispered something into an earpiece. Meanwhile, Emily Nguyen reached across the aisle to hand Jaden a small but folded piece of paper. On it, in elegant cursive, she had written, "Thank you for standing tall, even when adults sat down." And behind her, William Baxter added quietly, "Dignity is contagious. Son, don't let the world take that from you." The plane remained grounded for just a few more minutes. But something much bigger had already taken flight. It didn't take long for the gate to reopen. Within minutes of Captain Thompson's call, 2 new crew members, 1 flight attendant and 1 standby first officer, arrived at Gate 18. They were professional, focused, and quiet, aware that they were stepping into something far more delicate than a simple personnel swap. As Sarah Mitchell and Robert Hayes were officially removed from the flight manifest, the cabin doors remained open, not because of delay, but because Horizon Air, whether they realized it or not, was rewriting a chapter in how it treated its passengers. And at the center of that shift sat an 11-year-old boy, hands folded, back straight, eyes calm, like always. Jaden didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. When the new flight attendant, a soft-spoken woman named Karen Lee, stepped into first class and approached him, she knelt slightly and said, "Mr. Jaden, we're honored to have you back where you belong." Jaden looked her in the eye and nodded. "Thank exam, ma'am," he said gently. "I'm okay," around him. Passengers were quiet, not out of indifference, but out of reverence. They had seen something they'd never forget, not a tantrum, not a viral moment, but dignity, practiced, persistent, and utterly real. Michael Carter remained on board a few minutes longer. Standing near the front as the 2 new crew members settled in, he turned to the Horizon Air executives who had now fully entered the cabin, flanked by their own director of passenger operations. "This isn't the end of the conversation," Michael told them, still calm but firm. "When my son's dignity is dismissed like that, what does that say about your entire crew, about your system?" The operations director, a middle-aged man with glasses and a flushed face, nodded. "Mr. Carter, we understand. We'll conduct a full review, and we're grateful you handled this with—" Michael raised a hand slightly. "Don't thank me for doing what any father should do. Thank Jaden for not losing his voice when yours failed him." Then, just before stepping off the plane, Michael turned and addressed the passengers, not with a speech, not with drama, but with a simple sentence. "We can't fly forward if we're still stuck in where we think people belong." And then he left. The cabin door hissing closed behind him. It wasn't the exit of a CEO, it was the quiet departure of a man who knew his work would begin once the wheels left the ground, back in 2A. Jaden sat with a cup of water and a small cookie the new flight attendant had brought. Not a bribe, not a performance, just kindness, real kindness. Emily Nguyen leaned toward him from 2C and said softly, "If I had half your grace when I was your age, my life would have been very different." Jaden gave a small smile. "My dad says grace isn't about letting things go. It's about carrying them right." Emily chuckled. "He raised you right?" In row 1, William Baxter sat with his hands folded, glancing occasionally back at Jaden. After a few minutes, he stood, turned around, and crouched down beside Jaden's seat. "Can I say something?" he asked gently. Jaden looked up. "Of course, sir." William cleared his throat. When I first saw you sit down earlier, I made a judgment. Not because you did anything, just because that was wrong. And I want you to know, I see you now. Not as a kid, not as someone's son, but as a young man who reminded me what dignity looks like. Jaden blinked once, then replied, "Thank you for telling me. Most people don't." William smiled. "I'll do better next time." "That's a promise." As he returned to his seat, a quiet kind of warmth spread through the cabin. No applause, no social media outbursts, just human beings realizing they had more to learn, and someone just taught them. Up near the cockpit, Captain Thompson finished reviewing the final checklist with his new first officer. His tone was steady again, but his eyes held a different kind of focus. He called back to the lead flight attendant. "Let's close the cabin. We're ready for departure." But before she sealed the door, the Horizon Air Operations Director made one last move. He leaned over to Emily and Gwen and whispered, "Would you be open to speaking with us after the flight? We're assembling a new passenger advisory group, and your voice clearly matters." Emily's eyebrows rose. "You want me involved?" "You spoke up when it counted," he said. "That's more than most." Emily nodded. "I'll consider it, but only if you let Jaden speak first." The man glanced at Jaden, then smiled. "Deal." And that wasn't the only change. By the time Michael Carter reached the VIP lounge, he had already sent an email to Horizon's board of directors, a formal request to review all crew bias protocols and training systems, with a proposal to pilot a new initiative focused on how flight crews identify, approach, and support underrepresented passengers. Attached was a name: the Jaden Protocol. But Jaden didn't know any of that yet. He simply looked out the window as the plane pulled away from the gate, thinking about how strange it felt to be so young, and yet already teaching grown adults what fairness should look like. Karen, the new flight attendant, returned to check on him once more. "Everything good, Mr. Jaden?" He nodded. "Yes, thank you." She paused, then added gently, "If there's anything else you need, anything at all, you just let me know." Jaden glanced around first class, then back at her. "I'm not angry," he said, "but I remember everything." Karen's eyes softened. "That's why you'll make change, not just noise." A moment later, the aircraft lifted into the sky, quiet, steady, like the boy seated in 2A, and for the first time that day, Jaden closed his eyes, not in defeat, but in peace. 3 weeks later, Horizon Air held a press conference at its national headquarters in Portland, Oregon. The backdrop was sleek, navy and silver banners, the company's insignia shining beneath soft studio lighting. But there was no distraction from what really mattered. At the center of the stage stood Michael Carter, CEO of Carter Dynamics and strategic consultant to Horizon's executive board. He didn't wear a suit that day, just a white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a calmness in his posture that said, "This isn't about show, it's about change." He stood behind the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began in that same even tone that had carried so much power weeks earlier. "Good afternoon," he said. "Today, I'm proud to announce the launch of a company-wide initiative designed to ensure that what happened to my son, and to so many others in silence, will never happen again." A quiet rustle moved through the seated crowd of reporters, stakeholders, and Horizon employees. Michael paused for just a second, then continued. "We call it the Jaden Protocol, named not because he's my son, but because he reminded us, all of us, what dignity looks like when it's tested, and what courage sounds like when it speaks softly but firmly behind him." A slide appeared on the screen. The Jaden Protocol, a framework for dignity in every seat. Bullet points followed. Mandatory implicit bias training for all flight crew and gate staff. A new escalation review board including community passengers and youth representatives. Real-time reporting options for in-flight discrimination concerns. And a new flight boarding procedure where gate agents would re-announce the names of unaccompanied minors in first or business class to confirm, protect, and empower them. No child would ever be asked again, "Are you sure you belong here?" Without someone ready to answer, "Yes, absolutely, and we're watching." Michael stepped aside, and a smaller figure approached the podium, dressed neatly in a navy blue blazer and light gray pants, the same way he had flown that day. Jaden Carter, 11 years old. Microphone adjusted just a little lower. He cleared his throat. No flash in his eyes, just calm, direct focus. And then he spoke, not too fast, not too slow. "My name is Jaden," he said, "and I want to say one thing. Respect should never need a title to be given. I didn't want attention. I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted to sit where I belonged and be treated like I deserved to be there." His words landed like truth wrapped in innocence. I was scared, but I didn't run. I didn't yell. I just called my dad, because that's what he taught me. When something's wrong, speak clearly and stand still. He paused. "I hope no other kid has to go through that, and if they do, I hope someone listens." The room didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. What filled the space was deeper, that quiet, throat-thickening recognition that you've just heard something real. After the press conference, dozens of media outlets picked up the story. But this time, it wasn't just about a boy being kicked from his seat. It was about what followed, about the silence that turned into structure, about the system that didn't just apologize, but transformed. Other airlines, quietly at first, then publicly, reached out to Horizon for partnership access to the Jaden Protocol. United, Alaska, even some regional carriers inside Horizon. The tone shifted almost overnight. Crew briefings included new language, passenger equity check. Training now included real-life playback of Jaden's interaction, not as a shame moment, but as a learning model. And in flight after flight, something began to happen. More flight attendants making eye contact when greeting children. More gate agents pausing to explain things clearly. More unspoken moments where the system no longer just moved people, but saw them. And Sarah Mitchell, she never returned to the airline after her termination. She sent a letter addressed not to Horizon's HR department, but directly to Jaden. It read, "In part, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know. You taught me more in 5 minutes than I had learned in 18 years of flying. I can't take back what I did, but I can promise that if I ever work with people again, I'll do it differently." Jaden read it once, then folded it. He didn't respond, but he placed it in a folder his father had started for him. Not a scrapbook of trauma, but a timeline of transformation. Life returned to normal, mostly. Jaden went back to school, played chess after class, attended a summer coding camp. But he was no longer just a quiet, smart kid who flew a lot. He was a symbol, not because he wanted to be, but because the world needed one, and he carried that lightly. He never wore it on his sleeve, only in how he carried himself. A little taller, a little slower to speak, a little quicker to listen. One morning, 2 months after the flight, Jaden and his father boarded a different Horizon Air flight, this time from Phoenix to Minneapolis. They walked through the gate quietly. No press, no announcement, just another father and son on a trip. But something was different as they stepped into first class. The flight attendant looked at Jaden and said, without hesitation. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter. 2A is ready for you." Jaden smiled, then replied, "Thank you, but you can just call me Jaden." They sat down. No fanfare, no flashbulbs. Just peace. Michael looked over and asked, "You good?" Jaden nodded. "Yeah, I don't need a big seat. I just need a fair one." Michael smiled. That's the legacy. And as the aircraft lifted from the ground, carrying them forward, so too did something else. A new standard in the sky. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it, not just to spread awareness, but to remind others that quiet dignity can change everything. Don't forget to like, subscribe. Until next time, stay kind, stay just, and never underestimate the power of standing your ground with grace.